Hello and welcome to The Charity Show, the podcast for charity insiders by charity insiders. Please rate, follow or subscribe to us on your usual podcast platform. And here's what's coming up in episode 11.
Parkrun in numbers for you here, Piers. Here we go. 10 million registered parkrunners, 900,000 volunteers, 2,500 parkrun locations, 25 parkruns in prisons and young offenders institutes. That's amazing. And 23 countries where parkrun takes place. And that is growth on an incredible scale over 20 years.
I had never really, and this might sound stupid to you, and indeed a lot of your listeners, but I'd never really considered charity as being an industry before. And then you think about it for more than 10 seconds, you go, oh, of course it is. Of course it is. Everything has a kind of layer of administration and whatnot. And there's all these cogs behind what you're seeing. So it occurred to me that would be a very interesting world to set a sitcom in.
I found this really shocking figure that the Charities Aid Foundation have estimated that over £560 million a year goes unclaimed through people not claiming GiftAid on their donations. And the research goes on to say that 26%, so that's a quarter of people who donate to charities or do not use GiftAid whatsoever. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of The Charity Show with me, Piers Townley, PR Manager at the Brain Tumour Charity.
And me, Tim Beynon, Head of Marketing Engagement at the Firefighters Charity.
So what have you been up to, Tim, the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, lots going on. Busy as ever, both at home, all the stuff's going on at home as it always does, and then at work as well, and lots going on at work. We've entered, and I know we've talked about it on the show before, the Smiley Charity Film Awards for 2025. So we put our application in this week for a film we created to support the launch of our suicide crisis line last November. So a really powerful film which the marketing engagement team created. And it's going to be interesting to see how we get on. We're in the mix with charities of a similar size to ours, but I imagine that some of those charities probably spend quite a lot of money on the production side of things when it comes to their films. We, in stark contrast, created a film pretty much at zero cost. It was a really powerful film using images and voices to talk about the impact of suicide on firefighting families. So fingers crossed, we'll see how that goes. And other things going on, just something I'm really keen to remind everybody, we talked about it last week as well, really want to encourage people to send us their voice messages. So we've got this amazing new tool, really, really simple, one click. Record your 20-30 seconds of promotion, whatever it is you want to tell us about what you're doing, what the charity or charity is working on, the campaigns you're running, the people who work for you, your fundraisers, your volunteers, people who've done amazing things. Send us a message, tell us about them, and we'll play it out on the show. So really, really simple. All the links are in the show notes for you. So crack on and do that, and look forward to hearing from you. But what about you, Piers? What's your last couple of weeks been like?
Like yourself, Tim, very, very busy, but that's fantastic news about the Smiley Film Awards. I was lucky enough to go to that earlier on this year where our celebrity support, Amy Nuttall, performed, and some other charities' films are just absolutely incredible. So all the best. We will, no doubt, as the show will follow the process as it goes towards the actual award ceremony next March. The last couple of weeks, we've been building up to quite a momentous time for us, actually. So after 27 years at the charity that he set up with his own wife after they lost their daughter, Samantha Dickson, our trustee and our chair of trustees, Neil Dickson, is retiring. So 27 years in the game, helped build us to be the biggest brain tumour charity, one of the biggest brain tumour charities in the world. And he's going to stay on. He's going to stay on as the research committee and as head of the Samantha Dickson Fund, which is a supporter group that's affiliated with the charities. We have hundreds of these supporter groups. So he's going to carry on doing that work. But quite a momentous time for him. And we've had the likes of Dawn French and Tom Daly and Lord Spencer and Nicky Chapman all send in video messages of support, and some of the celebrities that were quite closely associated and continue to be closely associated with the charity have lent their support to this news. So a massive shout out to Neil. 27 years, fantastic charity that he's built up over the years. Again,
incredible legacy he's leaving behind him, both for him and for his daughter as well. Amazing legacy.
Exactly, and for the landscape that he's left behind in a much, much better, much research-driven space than it was when they first launched it. And then just quickly, another one of our celebrity supporters for the Brain Tumour Charity. It's the author Sophie Kinsella, the author of the books, the Shopaholic range of books and the Burnout. She's got a new novella based on her own brain tumour diagnosis that she revealed this year. And she's launched that. There's a series of book tours and loads of media work. And obviously, we've supported her and her family, and she's reciprocated. And so we're just championing that. That's been the two focus of the last couple of weeks. A lot of comms, a lot of internal comms, and a lot of external comms there with Sophie. So busy.
Is that a fiction book or a non-fiction? Is that?
It is, yes. It's a non-fiction novella. So it's only a very small book, but it's autobiographical. It's based on Sophie's own diagnosis and the subsequent treatment. So that's out, yes, last week or so as we go to live with the podcast.
Excellent. We'll stick a link to that in the show notes. Well, I think sounds fantastic. Of course, we both had our ears to the radio this week as we listened back to the brilliant BBC Radio 4 Third Sector comedy Do-Gooders, written by our guest today, comedian and writer Garrett Millerick. Have you ever contemplated a career in comedy, Piers? And if so,
I do remember as we spoke with Garrett, I can't think of anything more terrifying, Tim, than standing on a stage and waiting for the audience waiting for us to entertain them, waiting for them to make them smile. I think it'd be the most gut-wrenching experience I can imagine. What about you?
No, God, mate, Jesus, it's that's as far away from my comfort zone as I could possibly be. Trying to make people laugh, absolutely not. I think you probably, I remember going as a student to comedy gigs where the person's bombed on stage, and there's nothing more awkward as somebody watching. You feel the pain, you feel for them. It's just awful. So yeah, I'm too scared to do that.
It's quite a strange response, really. I mean, we both work in comms departments, so maybe you would think, from an outsider's point of view, that's your bread and butter, that kind of presenting and being. But no, not when there's so much expectation.
No, absolutely not. This is we're talking to Garrett about his sitcom though, and it is a cracking good listen. And we'll put the links in the show notes for people to go and listen to it. But what about sitcom, Piers? Have you got a favourite over the years? Something that you cherish?
Do you know what? There's almost too many to mention. I'm massive fans of things like Spaced and Peep Show. Continue to rewatch some of those just for the way they're edited and they're formatted, kind of ahead of their time in the way they were put together. And obviously the incredible talent on there. Huge fan of Mark Heap from Spaced. That came on now because we're rewatching lots of Friday Night Dinners, which is just a fantastic sitcom. Mark Heap is also in that as well, and my kids we're watching loads of reruns of that as well. But I've got a soft spot for things like Colin from Accounts. Love that, a bit of Aussie sitcom, and Alma's Not Normal come back again, which is just fantastic as well. So there's so much out there, and I think it's so idiosyncratic to different people have different things that they get from them. It's interesting that Garrett will actually speak about what makes a good script, what makes a good sitcom, what makes the characters come alive. So those elements kind of continue through, but so many different ones out there. What about yourself?
Oh God, I'm with you on a lot of that. I loved Spaced. Spaced was brilliant, and I did try to show that to my kids. They didn't quite get it. It's a little bit our era and not theirs. So it's kind of a little bit dated for them, even though it was ahead of its time. Definitely, it's a cracking good sitcom that was. And Mark Heap, what a legend he is. And I think that shows you the importance in comedy. Not that I know much about comedy, but in terms of sitcoms, from a personal perspective, it's about the characters, isn't it? About you creating really strong characters. And Jim in Friday Night Dinner is just hilarious. It's all to do with Mark Heap's performance, but it's also great writing as well. So I'm a huge fan of well-written, well-acted sitcoms. I think probably personally for me, Blackadder is right up there as an all-time favourite, because every series is an absolute cracker.
Okay, let's take a look at some third sector news. What's caught your eye this week, Tim?
Okay, so this is the classic. This is a classic thing that Brits moan about: the price of stamps. Right? There's a few things in this world that Brits like to moan about, and the weather and the price of stamps seems to be something that is always in the news and people are always talking about. But the price of stamps has gone up again by 30p. So do you know the cost of a first class stamp piece?
I just know there's a lot.
Take a guess at how much do you think a first class stamp is?
£1.50.
£1.65.
Oh.
So you're not far off. But anyway, it's gone up by 30p. And it's quite interesting. I saw this article about the impact of that, and it is impacting charities, especially in regards to charity Christmas cards. So this article that I spotted, it says that the Royal Mail has been accused of being short-sighted and risking a drop in the number of charity Christmas cards sent this year as it increases stamp prices. And this does actually have a significant knock-on effect for charities. So in this article, Christine Ansell, the chief executive of charity card specialist Cards for Good Causes, she said, "We already know that the general public's funds are vastly reduced due to the cost of living crisis," I think we've talked about on the show before. "So making it more difficult to send greetings cards quickly and affordably will mean shoppers are less likely to spend with us at this Christmas." So, people buying less Christmas cards from charities, which then has a knock-on impact in terms of their fundraising. So there you go. The price of stamps and the impact on charities could be significant. So that caught my eye. And then the other one that I had to talk about, because I'm a massive fan, is Parkrun. Parkrun turning 20. And what an amazing charity Parkrun is. It does Parkrun in numbers for you here, Piers. Here we go. 10 million registered parkrunners, 900,000 volunteers, 2,500 parkrun locations, 25 parkruns in prisons and young offenders institutes. That's amazing. And 23 countries where parkrun takes place. And that is growth on an incredible scale over 20 years. And it overcame the pandemic and all the issues that came with that. And so I think just to have reached 20 is fantastic. I was there last Saturday at my local parkrun, and they had cake. Took with a big 20th anniversary, 20th birthday cake there as well. So fantastic. Big fan of Parkrun. How about you, Piers? I know you've done Parkrun before. I've seen you.
Yes, but I'm definitely a Parkrun newbie. I've yet to get my 50 run t-shirt yet, but I think we do the same Parkrun just up the road. It's been a few months since I've gone back and done it again. And I only started doing it about a year ago and was actually bowled away by how inclusive and supportive it was. Everyone was there. It was almost like a little cult, but in a really, really good way. Everyone was so supportive of so many people. So as a model, as a thing, I think it's just exceptional. Such a good thing to be part of.
Fantastic. So happy birthday, Parkrun. What about you, Piers? What news has caught your eye?
Well, this is something that crops up again and again, whether you're taking a bag to the charity shop, whether you're paying online, when you're signing up to a fundraiser for your chosen charity, the idea of GiftAid. And I found this really shocking figure that the Charities Aid Foundation, which has just carried out a 5,000 polling research recently, and they've estimated that over £560 million a year goes unclaimed through people not claiming GiftAid on their donations. And the research goes on to say that 26%, so that's a quarter of people who donate to charities or do not use GiftAid whatsoever. And I just think that's an astounding figure. And some of the reasons that the research threw up were that it was too much effort, didn't always remember.
Really? Placing a tick in a box, too much effort.
Exactly. So it's like, well, what else information do places and institutions gather from that? What is it that's making it really difficult for people to give GiftAid? Because as you say, I've always found it really, really straightforward, but maybe there is a barrier there. Other barriers were it's not always an option, and quite an interesting one that people said it's not possible when they donated with cash. So I guess that's an element. I mean, cash donations are still very, very big. We're not all, contactless at the moment. But I just thought that 26% that don't use it as a regular thing, which is just a phenomenal amount. And then when you're talking about 560 million, that's a lot of untapped funds there for so many charities.
It's a really interesting one, and I think it's a challenge not only with cash but also with digital, because I think giving digitally and a lot of the tap to donate points is a challenge there with collecting GiftAid as well, because that is such a quick transaction that people perhaps don't want to stop and take the time to maybe fill in the extra in the little bits they have to fill in terms of name, address, and ticking the box to say they're a UK taxpayer and stuff. Maybe that is a barrier. Time, people just want to tap and donate and go. So I can see that, but that's a shocking statistic because that money could be doing so much good. That's the thing.
It is, isn't it? If you think about it, that's a quarter. So a quarter of all your fundraisers for your specific charity may not be actually taking advantage of this, this tax relief for charitable funds, which is a lot of money if you start crunching the numbers. Set in the world of a fictional mid-level Alzheimer's charity, BBC Radio 4 sitcom Do-Gooders shines a comedic spotlight on the third sector and those who work in it. The likes of Frank Skinner and Faye Ripley, it intertwines the complexities of office politics and admin with the hit-and-miss reality of modern-day fundraising and events. From the night walk that ends up being mistaken for an act of eco-terrorism, to cheating in the marathon and avoiding daily PR disasters, the Alzheimer's Alliance staff find themselves constantly battling to be heard above the noise of those at the top of the charity league table. It's a brilliantly written and performed series. Do-Gooders is the brainchild of comedian Garrett Millerick, who also stars as the rather hapless Clive. And Garrett joined us recently to discuss the show and what inspired him to write a comedy about charity. So hi Garrett, and welcome to the Charity Show podcast. So you've picked up so many plaudits for the likes of your shows, Sunflower, Smile, Fringe shows, and for the Chortle Awards. Talk us through how you ended up doing this very unusual and what's looking like a very successful career.
Hi guys, thanks very much for having me on. So I ended up doing this entirely by accident. I originally wanted to be a theatre director, and I sort of accidentally fell into doing stand-up comedy about 12 years ago. So I've now been doing it for so long, I sort of struggle to remember exactly why I got into it.
Can you remember your very first gig?
Well, I did some sketch comedy and things before, and I performed as... I did some character stuff before I started doing straight stand-up. My first stand-up gig was in February of 2012, and I do remember it, but I had done various other bits and pieces of performance before then, so I don't have a kind of I don't have a particularly good origin gig story.
That's what it's all about, the origin stories these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Garrett, when Do-Gooders first aired in both our charities, there was a real wow. There's a show about the third sector.
Yeah,
never really been done before. So why and when did you have the idea of setting the series in a charity?
So when I first moved to London in around 2007, I was living with a friend of mine from university, and he was working for a charity. And I didn't know anyone in London at the time. So I'd hang out with him and his colleagues. And as you are both, and presumably a lot of your listeners are aware, charity people tend to socialise with other charity people quite a lot after work and whatnot. So I go down drinking with them in London Bridge, and one evening, fairly sort of early on, I was listening to two people having a pitched argument about cancer research. I had never heard that expressed before, obviously, as a civilian. And so I sort of interjected, I was like, what on earth do you mean? And they were like, oh, they just hoover up all the money, and they're the biggest, shiniest boys on the block. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. And then they were sort of talking me through the general sort of pecking order that you guys have in the third sector, that there is a huge thing. And one guy was like, oh, can't stand lifeboats. And I thought, oh, this is an interesting world. And it's a world that had never really occurred to me before, because most people's experience with charities is kind of front facing. You see people, stopping on the street and asking for your direct debit details, or people with collection tins, or Poppy Day, Red Nose Day, that kind of thing, or now social media campaigns, people saying I'm doing this because of X, Y, or Z. So that's kind of what my experience of charity up to that point had been, and I had never really, and this might sound stupid to you, and indeed a lot of your listeners, but I'd never really considered charity as being an industry before. And then you think about it for more than 10 seconds, you go, oh, of course it is. Of course it is. Everything has a kind of layer of administration and whatnot. And there's all these cogs behind what you're seeing. So it occurred to me that would be a very interesting world to set a sitcom in. And I'd always wanted to write an ensemble sitcom piece. And I worked up a number of ideas of things to do. I wrote a pitch about a group of traffic wardens, and that was kind of based on the idea of what it's like to have the world's worst job. That you go to work in the morning and you have to earn a living, but it's something everybody hates. Whereas charity is something that's incredibly ubiquitous. And the thing I found interesting about it is you're doing something that's demonstrably good. You're changing the world, you're improving people's lives, you're improving the situation. But in that world, you still have all of the attendant stresses and strains and competition and personalities that everybody has at work, because it's a job. So that was kind of the root of, okay, we look at a group of people who are doing something that's good and worthy and improving the world, but they're still coming across all of the associated stress and pressure that you get with the job and with a workplace environment. The original strap line for the pitch when I was pitching it to companies was, if you want to save the world, there will be admin.
We talk about that a lot, Tim. There is still lots of admin, yeah. No matter how many worthy the cause or how passionate you are, yeah, there's the admin.
Yeah, 100%.
And the layers of it.
Absolutely right. But I think it's fascinating. You touched on there, people's perceptions of the third sector who don't work in charities is something that, but yeah, perhaps we're a step back from that, but occasionally it does hit you. I remember once talking to somebody about what I did, and their first question was to me was, do you get paid? They assumed that everyone who works for a charity is a volunteer and does it for free. So it was news to this guy that actually I had a paid job at a charity.
And you get those people, there are those frequent news stories criticizing how much people get paid. There was one a few years ago, it was a fairly big charity, and they were criticizing that the CEO was on a 6-figure salary. And you go, well, yeah, of course, because it's a multinational corporation, essentially, and it requires a skill set to run an organization of that size. That skill set has a market value. And by the way, what that person being paid is well below what the average market value of that skill set is. But it has to be enough to attract professional people who are going to do a professional, it's a difficult job. You're handling huge amounts of money and projects and whatnot. And that criticism that people have of charities is wild. It's absolutely insane.
It is. And it's usually the chief execs that get the brunt of it. As soon as chief exec salaries are published, or that's everyone thinks, oh, how can they pay them that much? I'm donating. I'm not donating towards the chief exec. I'm donating towards whatever. So they
really do. And that idea that if you're putting money forward, it's like, it's not being. I don't want it wasted on this, that, and the other thing. And you go, well, this, that, and the other thing is how the money effectively gets to where it needs to go. I find that the relationship that the public have with charity as well is an interesting kind of base for comedy. And also, it'd never been, as you said, it'd never been done before. So it's quite like everything's been done, but that hadn't. So it's like,
I'll have some of that.
Yeah, definitely. So we really enjoyed listening to it, and there's definitely a few scenes that and a few episodes that sort of certainly stuck with me. Did you have a favourite of all the ones you wrote and that you were a part of?
The marathon was my favorite one. So that was, I'd sort of planned a kind of rough arc for the series, that it was going to start with this inciting incident of Clive, my character, saying that he was going to do the marathon, and then just kind of breadcrumb that in throughout the series. But then the final episode, I was like, right, I actually have to do the marathon. I myself had to write an episode about the marathon, and one of the challenges is doing that on radio. It's a difficult thing to do. But yeah, I had to sort of investigate and think about quite a lot how one might cheat at a marathon, and which is very difficult to do. And people have done it, thank you.
Elite athletes have done it. Elite athletes have jumped in cars and gone on the tube,
buses and whatnot. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So to work it out and then work out how to thwart that and stuff. So it was kind of a fun, fast plot to do. And I left it to last. So I wrote everything, and then I was like, right, episode 6, and I wanted to end the series on a bang. So I put myself under quite a lot of pressure for that episode, and I was very pleased with how it turned out.
On a personal level, I really enjoyed the walk, the challenge walk, because I think it made me laugh, because I think there's such a fine line between success and disaster with challenge events. Yeah, and I love the whole idea of walking in the dark with tiki torches and it going terribly wrong.
Descending on the farmers.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to name which charity's website I nicked that off, but you're doing research for things. You go on, I follow be careful what I say now, so I get blocked by any of them. But I follow loads of charity Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, and whatnot, and read an awful lot of charity websites and stuff. And yeah, I saw a night walk on there, and I immediately thought, yeah, I'm gonna I'm gonna use that.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how you got all the cast on board. We're, so you've got some fantastic names there, some very well-known names, and they really bring the characters to life. How did you get them on board, and how did that all go?
Well, I can't take credit for that, as I only wrote it. I didn't produce it, so the producer cast it. So I had ideas. There are certain things like I've known here for years, and I know Anya quite well, and I've known Frank. So I had kind of ideas of who I wanted in my head. But in terms of the execution of that, I said to a producer, I'd like these people. And he did an incredibly good job of putting the thing together. And I was very much shielded from any of the stresses and strains of that in my job. So I just had to go away and write the thing. And I got various excellent emails coming back saying, oh, they've read it and they like it and they're going to do it. And I was like, oh, great.
Did you have Frank Skinner in mind when you wrote Ken? Was that voice always in the back of your head?
Yeah, like fairly early on. I've been, like most people, I've been a fan of Frank's for years, and I met him a few years ago, and that was definitely somebody I really, really wanted, and he's phenomenal in it. It was kind of funny because the character I'd written that character, when I was trying to work out kind of what the structure of the team was and whatever. Having a legacy guy in the middle of the events team doesn't necessarily make any sense. But there are a couple of lines about why that happened. But when I was researching it, there was one guy who worked in legacy donations who somebody put me in touch with, and I'd already kind of sketched out the character. And then he sort of said, "Yeah, I sort of appreciate what you're doing, but I really don't want to talk to you." And I was like, "That's perfect, absolutely ideal. Thank you very much."
Nailed it. Yeah.
Brilliant. It couldn't have been anyone else other than Frank, though, could it?
He's perfect for it.
He was fantastic. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about feedback, and I think this goes back to your live shows as well, because I can't think of anything more terrifying than getting up on stage and crossing fingers that what you say is going to go down well without someone going, "You shit, get off the stage." Were you nervous? I mean, are you naturally thick-skinned anyway, or is that something you've had to learn? And then, particularly with do-gooders, were you kind of nervous that you might tread on a few toes?
I was. I mean, with do-gooders, not especially, because I think it was quite. I don't know of anyone who's been particularly who has been upset by it. I might be wrong there, but I mean, it was a very sort of affectionate look at the world, and it's a character sitcom set in a particular world. So I was very kind of clear with myself when I was kicking off writing it that I didn't want to mock the act of charity. So people giving or fundraising in any way, or really to mock anyone being ill. What I wanted to look at was the administration side of it and the frustrations that thing. I mean, choosing initially there was a draft where I made up a disease, and that was okay, but it didn't really work. And the reason it had to be something like Alzheimer's is it's kind of, I'm not offending anyone here, but it's sort of mid-tier in terms of the public's perception of things. So they're in that kind of running order that people have in their brain. There are real kind of Premier League, your Live 8 or something like that. That's really kind of the top one. And then there's very fashionable ones which change whatever. Obviously, ALS, motor neuron was very big when the Ice Bucket Challenge was coming around, and that's kind of a movable feast. But things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and diseases, like they're very serious diseases that the public are aware of, like very aware of. There's a lot of recognition around that, but it's not quite Bob Geldof, at that level. So it was kind of a deliberate choice to pitch it there, and I had known people who were working in that space, so I chose that. And there aren't really, I mean, there are a handful of kind of gallows humor jokes, I suppose, which I think would be relatively honest for people working in that situation. But yeah, I was quite sort of clear where I was getting the comedy from. and the generational relationships between the characters, and that it was a sort of affectionate look at this space. I wasn't going in being like, hey, I'm trying to kick the legs out from under anything or criticize people or go particularly hard at anything. It was supposed to be kind of accessible and warm. So I hope it is that. I hope it is that. And I haven't had any pushback, but I wasn't expecting a huge amount of pushback given that.
Did you speak, Garrett, to any of the real world Alzheimer's charities?
Not. I spoke
to
people who work for Alzheimer's charities. Yeah, I spoke to fundraisers and researchers. So yeah, I did in the research of it talk to a lot of people who works in charity. I've got a lot of friends who work in charity, and I was in a relationship with someone for a very long time who worked in charity fundraising events. So in terms of research, I was very lucky in having access to those people and people being very open. People were very open to talking to me when I said what I was doing, and I was quite clear about, what I just said then about where the satire was coming from, where the direction of the humor was. People were great in telling me about the world and whatnot. So I was very lucky with that.
That's really interesting when you're talking about the different tiers of charity, because I think that's almost an unspoken thing about sometimes in the third sector. There are the ones that you see on the telly.
Yeah.
There are the big behemoth ones that you can name off the top of your head.
Yes.
And then everyone else is vying for that space, whether that's on socials or on TV or, there is that kind of competition because it's a very crowded space.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting that you were talking about, the mid-tier level. And what I thought about the whole series, I think Tim probably agrees with me, it feels like you spent quite a lot of your career working in a charity. So you've obviously had lots of input is the right word, but lots of insight. There's actually like, well, how do you know that? And how do you know that? Unless you've worked in the charity. So
yeah, I had ideas of the stories I wanted to tell and the characters, and then I sort of touched base with a few people and said, does this ring true? And yeah, I've never worked in an office. So I've never worked in a charity and I've never worked in an office and those things. I've worked in other places, and what I do, stand-up comedy, I work by myself a huge amount, and then I'll see other comics on bills and whatnot, but it's quite a sort of solitary existence. So there isn't a huge amount of crossover, other than I do work in a very competitive space and I work with lots of different personalities and that sort of thing. And I think that's fairly universal.
Yes. That's what there's archetypes of personalities, isn't there? Which comes across in do-gooders. There is that type of person, or there's that type of rivalry, or that type of
I mean, when you first emailed me, I think my first response was, do you want me to get me on and grill me on everything I got wrong? Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that people who are in the third sector are enjoying it, and I think
it's because it is so closely mirroring what we sometimes see on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, that's great.
There's a lot there that everyone can relate to, for sure.
The tiki torches coming down through the night walk is something that goes through your comms plan if you're going to have crisis comms, and the rivalry between online fundraising and events fundraising. These things we have on the kind of bread and butter, which make it so that makes the show resonates to those who are working in the third sector, as well as just being a character situational.
I'm very pleased to hear that it rang true with you. The reason it's in an events that I chose events was because of it being that thing we were talking about earlier, the forward-facing public for an audience to sort of understand it. Setting it in a research department probably wouldn't have worked. Mm-hmm. But there's that entry point for the outside world that constantly comes into the series, which is dealing with people on the walk or trying to get influences in or whatever. That's something very easy and very quickly you can get an audience to understand, and then you can bring them into the world.
Yeah, I totally get that. Let me ask you, in terms of charity and your life as a stand-up, how often do the two cross? Do you get approached by charities much to do stand-up gigs for them? That kind of stuff? Do you do much sort of charity stand-up work?
Yeah, loads. There are loads of charity gigs. I did a fundraiser a few weeks ago, actually, for somebody who was raising money for Alzheimer's research. And that's a coincidence. That was actually, that was before the series aired, actually. It was the beginning of the summer. But yeah, I've done things for all sorts of charities. So, most comedians have, I'd say at least 4 or 5 times a year, do something like that. And I've done everything from like PTAs to military charities to Parkinson's benefits, cancer research benefits. I did one for African Farm Aid. Basically, yeah, if you've got a good cause and you're putting on a night, comics are fairly happy to come on.
Hypothetically speaking, if there was a charity that looked after firefighters and one that looked after people with brain tumours, what would they do to go about getting you to do a good?
You call my agent.
I knew you were going to say that. I told you, Tim, we should have got his phone number.
But yeah, I mean, it's. I suppose I didn't write an episode. I did sketch out some notes for one, but I didn't write an episode at a comedy night because I felt a little bit too much inside baseball. Maybe if we do some more, there'll be something like that. But yeah, charity gigs. That's one of the things. I mean, as you say, like bread and butter things. You've got bike rides, marathons, sponsored things, and then there's events and comedy gigs and music gigs and things like that are quite a ubiquitous part of charity fundraising, aren't they? So yeah, I have done my fair share of those, but I don't play favourites. I don't mind. Anyone calls me up and says we've got a thing up, I'm free, I'll come and do it.
Excellent, duly noted. Just making a note of that. And I don't know a huge amount about the life of what it's like being a stand-up, but what we are aware of, and I suppose everyone's aware of these days, is how much the world has changed in terms of the fact that people are almost sort of scared to say anything these days, especially online, in case they upset someone or it escalates rapidly and they find themselves in deep water. So the whole sort of PC landscape has changed quite considerably in recent times. How does that affect you? And did that come into your mind at all when you were writing the series and when you came to sort of making jokes around Alzheimer's? You touched on it earlier on a little bit. Did that play on your mind at all, or do you just think? Where do you stand on the fine line between comedy and offence, I suppose?
I think it's a fairly sort of clear thing that as long as your target and your intention is correct. I mean, people sometimes characterise that as punching down or punching up or whatever, but I think, as long as your intention's correct and your target's correct, I think you're fairly well okay. That audiences are generally kind of self-policing entities. If you say something on stage an audience doesn't like, they'll let you know because they won't laugh. So what we're looking for is people to laugh. And I don't go out at work in anything I do trying to offend people. I want people to have fun.
Back to charities and events then, Garrett. If you were forced to do an event, what would be your thing, do you think? Would it be a marathon, or would it be a Tough Mudder? Or are you just a bake sale kind of guy?
I'm a bake sale kind of guy.
Bake sale, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I do that thing of putting on a gig, or doing the thing that Clive does in the series a lot of trying to have some sort of pleasurable experience, and then bathing it in the glow of charity. To say that I'm doing this.
So you're not going to be donning a costume like Clive then? For
no marathons for me, no bike rides.
Are sure, because you can apply for our charity. We'd love you to run in a costume.
Oh yeah, okay. You get me a spot in the London Marathon. I see. Set myself up here. You missed
before the end of this podcast.
You're coming back and saying, well, actually, a lot of people in the third sector were very offended by what you said in Do-Gooders, and the reason we've got you here is that you can make it right by running the London Marathon.
Yeah, nothing wrong with a guilt trip. Now, on the show, we do like to shout out to as many charities as possible. So, do you have a cause that's close to your heart at all, or is it just all of them?
Just all of them. Well, obviously,
just all of them.
Brain cancer charities and firefighting charities are hugely close to my heart.
Excellent.
So the thing that bothers me, that gets that thing in my stomach going, is when I see homeless people. That really, I don't know why it was that thing, but that thing, particularly for my whole adult life, when I see that really, I have an emotional reaction to that. So on that show, what I did, I made a joke in the middle of the show, and I told them it was homelessness that bothered me, and I said that I hadn't done anything about it because I'm a millennial windbag, but let's just chalk it up as a win that I've said that I do care about it. And then at the end of the show, there was a there was a bucket collection which was going to the venue and the producers, and I had only found out in the run up to the show that I wasn't getting my tips. Essentially, they were being siphoned off somewhere else. So I was like, okay. So I came up with a bit of a plan where I invited a homeless charity to come down, and I told the audience at the end I would be standing with a contractually mandated bucket, but don't put any money in that bucket because I don't get it anyway. But next to me, there'll be someone from homeless charity, and every single penny of that money will go to helping people on the street. So I sort of pulled this little stunt at the end, and I only told the producers in the venue about it the day before, and they were like, okay, well, we're going to do loads of PR about this. And I said, no, you can't do any. And they said, well, what if we stop you doing it? I was like, then I'll do PR about it. And they went, okay, you've thought about this. And I was like, every single angle. So it was really great, and we raised £10,000 over the course of the show, and people were amazing because the stunt, it connected with what I was saying in the show, and it was kind of a fun little kind of punk stuff. People were putting £50 notes in and going really stuffing it. We raised a huge amount of money, and it was incredibly satisfying. But that's the sort of biggest charity fundraising I've done, and that's an issue that I will always, if I can, give money to. So that's kind of, I fairly, as I said, I'll do benefit gigs, and I do donate. I donate to Greenpeace and various other people, and if I've got change, I'm not going to. I'm not going to walk past your bucket. But yeah, I think homelessness is the one that I get that emotional reaction to. So
do you think you know why? Is it the precariousness of our careers, or the precariousness of your career in the early days, maybe? No,
I don't think I've got, I've never been in a situation where I've faced that. I've been very lucky. I come from a very stable family, and that's not something I've had any experience with. I guess with a lot of them, with a lot of charity issues, and I suppose you and a lot of your listeners have this, you need to sort of engage people. Because I was just about to say, well, I see it and think, there go I, but for the grace of God. But that's the same with everything. That's the problem with the competition that you guys are faced with. We are all, one doctor's appointment possibly away from a diagnosis. We are all, one text message away from finding our family member has been involved in something, or we're so close to all these things, which is why what you guys do is so important. But yeah, I don't know why it is. There's no personal connection there whatsoever. It's just something that because it's right there in front of you, and you can kind of see, if you're walking and see somebody in a shop doorway.
It's so shocking.
It is shocking
in modern Britain that still happens.
Yeah, it's so possible for that not to be the case.
What's next for you, Garrett, in terms of Do Gooders is wrapped and in the can and available on iPlayer or BBC Sounds rather for anyone to listen to? BBC Sounds, get it right. What's next? Have you got a show in the pipeline?
Yeah, I'm going out on a national tour in the next couple of weeks. I'm doing a show called Needs More Space, which is nothing to do with charity. It's a history of space travel, which I've just been doing at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Excellent.
So I'm doing that till February, and then writing other bits and pieces and doing stand-up all down the country. And presumably after this, I'll be appearing at a charity benefit gig for firefighters and all.
Brain Tumour Charity.
Tumour Charity, yeah.
It says so on the piece of paper right now.
Yeah.
Do Gooders number
Excellent.
2?
I'd love to do more. We just have to wait and see. But yeah, I'd love to do more. I've got ideas and whatnot. And yeah, well, indeed, fingers crossed.
I've got to ask you, anyone listening to this who maybe is a closet comedian, a closet stand-up, or somebody who wants to write something that they want to pitch somewhere. Yeah. What's their first step? What's your advice to them?
Stay in the charity sector. The money's better. I mean, stand-up's one of those things where you have to. It's like it's been described as learning to play a musical instrument in public. There are loads of open mic gigs all over the country, and there are things you can do like comedy courses where you go on a few Saturdays and people will give you the basics. But you really just have to do it. It's one of those things you can't know until you do it. So if anyone's ever thinking about doing it, you totally can. There's zero barriers to entry. Just
other than the fact that you've got to be, I could not do it. I just couldn't do it. I don't have that level of bravery to do that. I would just freeze up and say, so you say there's no anyone could do it, but they can't.
I don't know, Tim, you've done a marathon. If I'm looking behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And was your entry to working for a firefighter charity perhaps having been a firefighter?
No. I've worked at several charities before this one, so kind of like a career charity guy.
That's another thing about charities, isn't it? Once it's like Hotel California, you guys never leave. Once you're in the third sector, you stay in the third sector.
That's true.
Well, I think that really speaks to. Obviously, there is huge challenges in what you do, but I think it really speaks to the rewarding nature of the work that you guys kind of stick in and doing that. And presumably to both of you, like going into the private sector would be complete anathema to you.
Well, we both came from there. So we both came from I was a journalist and so was Piers before we worked in the third sector. So we've both come from a sort of corporate commercial world.
Right.
Very different worlds.
And
I wouldn't want to go back. I'm hooked, absolutely hooked.
That's fantastic.
Amazing. Amazing thing to work.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. But yeah, if you want to try it, you just got to go and try it. It's kind of the same with anything, and you won't be good on the first one. You might have fun, but you won't be good. You'll find out through the process and the journey of doing it if you. If it's
I love watching comedy. Couldn't do it. Although I love watching comedy, but I would never sit in the front row. That's the other.
That's a myth. That's a total myth. You'll have more fun in the front row, or certainly up the front. But people are like, I have to sit in the back. But the most that's going to happen, someone's going to say, "What's your name?" They say, "Tim, I work for a firefighters charity," and then they'll tell 2 jokes about firefighters and move on to the next person. It's really not.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
I have to stress here on the podcast: you are safe in the front row of a comedy show. Yeah.
Oh, Garrett, it's as Tim says. I love comedy as well, and for the Brain Tumour Charity, we've got the likes of Hal Crittenden and Miles Job supporting us and stuff. And
amazing.
We have done comedy nights before, so I think your agent at some point in the future maybe get a knock on the door. But thank you so much for appearing on the charity show.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure.
Brilliant insight into it, and all our fingers are crossed for Do-Gooders second series.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thank you for asking me on. As I said, sort of about feedback or whatever, but you guys, contacting and saying that it rang true and everything. That's really nice to hear. That's really fantastic.
We should spread the word. I loved it.
Thank you.
In each episode of the Charity Show, we want to celebrate our sector superstars, those incredible people working, volunteering and fundraising across our sector. And you can nominate your deserving colleagues, volunteers or fundraisers. Just email us at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or get in touch through the links in the show notes. You can even send us a voice message that we can play out in the next episode. So, Piers, who's your superstar this week?
I love this story. It just shows the power of what charities do in the moment and the legacy and the impact that any sort of support or any sort of good things that they do can have. This is about Brian Cole, who was rescued by the RNLI after falling 200 foot down a cliff. But he did it 65 years ago while he was holidaying with he was just aged 17 at the time, but he's gone on to support the RNLI ever since. And they report, and the news piece said it dented his skull, but there's no major damage. But Brian has gone on to fundraise and support, and he still gives tours around Exmouth RNLI lifeboat station today. So that's 65 years of support for the charity that saved his life back there. And Brian is quoted as saying, "I was so grateful to the RNLI after every year after that. I collected for them work and began to give talks about my experience and the great work of the RNLI around Bath and later Yeovil, where I moved there." And that's also a lovely story, as back in March, the RNLI celebrated its 200th year. So fantastic charity and a fantastic fundraising superstar story from Brian.
Great. Love a story of somebody who's maintained their support for such a long period of time because of the impact that charity had on them at a young age as a teenager. So yeah, hats off to Brian. That's a cracking story. So my superstar story this week is all about potholes and how potholes have scuffed with somebody's fundraising.
You hit the double on this episode, haven't you, Tim? We've got stamps and we've got potholes. Is there anything more that we don't love moaning about?
I say anything. Well, I only need is a weather-related story now, and then that's the hat trick, isn't it? But potholes, and where we live around Fleet, they're shocking as well, aren't they? Because they're pretty bad around here.
Don't get started.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Before we go down that road, that pothole road. Okay. So this is about a guy called Mike Land, and Mike survived a bungee jumping accident, but unfortunately had to halt his world record attempt, pulling a 1.5 ton van for 9 hours. So basically, he's been trying to pull this van to break a world record and to raise money, but unfortunately he had to stop. And the reason he had to stop after pulling the vehicle for 10.5 miles, he had to try and beat 32 miles to capture the world record in 24 hours. But he was done in by potholes. Basically, it was too much for him to try and pull his van across the route that he'd taken because of the potholes. So he started the attempt at Down Ampney Airfield on the 4th of October, but had to stop on the Saturday when potholes on the airfield became too challenging. So I think we can all relate to that. Not that we're all pulling our cars around, but poor Mike. We really feel for you, Mike. That's a really tough one. He was raising money for Wiltshire Air Ambulance, and in true fundraising spirits, he's going to look for a new venue to try again. And his story is an incredible one. Doctors feared that he would never make a full recovery when he fractured his pelvis after a bungee jump. This sounds horrific. After his bungee jump rope snapped in 1993. Can you imagine anything more terrifying than that? That's horrific. But he's completed numerous challenges since then, and now works as a fitness instructor and a designer. So well done, Mike. Bad luck on not beating the record, but we've got every confidence in you that you will. And get in touch, and we might try and track you down and get you on the show to talk about it when you do finally beat that record. So yeah, don't worry about the potholes. Find some without any.
Yeah, survived a bungee jump, but scuppered by a pothole.
Yeah, shocking. So that's it for episode 10. Huge thanks to Garrett for giving us an insight into do-gooders. Go and take a listen to it if you haven't done so already. The links are in the show notes and it's on BBC Sound, so you should be able to find it pretty easily. And we've got some other great guests in the pipeline too, haven't we, Piers?
Absolutely. We're going to finding out about challenge events and how to make the most of them. And coming up next time, we talked to Charity Com's Chief Executive, Adela Worley, about the ethical dilemma facing all charities in regard to X. Should we or shouldn't we be on Elon Musk's much-changed Twitter?
That's an important question and something we all need to be thinking about. And don't forget, you can be a part of the show too. Just send us your voice messages or get in touch through any of the links in the show notes to share your stories and tell us what you'd like us to cover.
And don't forget, we want to know who your superstar fundraisers, volunteers or colleagues are too. So head to the show notes and share their brilliance with the rest of us.
And in the meantime, please follow or subscribe to us on your usual podcast platform and leave us a review, all of which help other people to find the show.
So that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Take care and we'll see you soon.